I was going to talk about this, and then I've been seeing a bunch of customers over the last couple of weeks, and I suddenly thought, well, maybe I'll change the subject completely and talk about IT in general in terms of enterprise IT and the way in which how much the infrastructure or the change, this infrastructure, is changing the way you need to think about building services for your users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly slant this away from sort of talking about infrastructure, because I think the bigger issue is less about the technology to some extent, because the technology, as we've seen, and I'll talk a bit about what we do, but as we've seen, it sort of is predictable. We kind of know what's going to happen. To Bob's point, it's like really, people start by virtualizing. Virtualization took place in 2007. Why? Because it's better use of the asset you have. Instead of 14%, you're up to 60%. We kind of understand that. We've been doing it for years. It's what technology does. It gets better and better and more efficient at doing the same thing it's always ever done. I started life in semiconductors. Semiconductors is a simple old business. All you do is you look at stuff and you see how much of it you can cram onto a single piece of silicon, and hopefully you make enough money selling that on a wafer such that you pay for it twice over. And that's semiconductors for you in a sort of 90-second sort of segue. The key thing here is, therefore, less about what will happen. We know what will happen. We'll end up with assets which are virtualized. You're going to trade off convenience and flexibility for trust, right? Your trust that the providers who are building this stuff know what they're doing. That level of trust is already increasing. Some of the fastest growing areas are in data center growth, in infrastructure as a service, so it's evidence. We're seeing it. But the key thing is, how do you harness it, and how do you get from where you are today to where you want to go, and how do you balance what might be skills gaps, right? I see that quite a bit. What might be kind of almost a bifurcation of how you think about stuff versus your boss, right? We all know that our non-technical members of management teams spend too much time believing the adverts they see and looking at the things and then bringing that back in. Why can't I have a tablet and access everything everywhere? Because you can't, right? Or maybe you can, right? And this sort of argument's gone on for the last few years. So really for me, what it's more about is understanding what are the constraints, and just peeling back a lot of the technology language is chucked around, correctly or incorrectly, and peeling back just to a bunch of principles that says, this is a timing thing for me, right? And so at what point do I want to get on this particular bus, and it makes sense for me? And at what point do I want to and how fast do I want to go? Because that is essentially the same as it always has been. So with further ado, I'll talk to that. So very quickly, I'll do the very short who we are, because you may not know Interoute. And then I want to talk about what's happening, the challenge, and then I'll touch on how we see an evolution of this in the marketplace. So a quick bit about Interoute. Interoute is Europe's largest IT platform. The definition of that really being in the fact that every single, pretty much every operator in Europe, the likes of Google, Amazon, Facebook, all use us, Microsoft as infrastructure, because they have to, because there is only us really in level 3 left in Europe. We have, so essentially we're a massive piece of infrastructure. Now we could have stayed doing that, and we sell to governments, UEFA, a bunch of other people. We could have stayed doing that, but what we did is essentially, my background is not construction. It's, as I said, semiconductors and the internet. And what we've been doing is we've been building for the last 10 years now, essentially efficient platforms, the way in which we build platforms out. And what this effectively means is physically, we've been converging our physical platforms to build something where we end up today, whereby we have a very big packet network, a very big common computing core, and on top of that, we can virtualize everything. As the CTO of the company, anyone who's from a service provider will know, you can do network, you can do compute, you can do storage, and then you get into this long tail of diversity of service. And the challenge is not technology, the challenge is logistics and operations. And this model is far more efficient in terms of building services and creating them and pushing them out. But the key thing for us is that what we then do is we create this thing called Unified ICT, which is about integration. Think Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office famously wasn't the best individual spreadsheet presentation, et cetera, et cetera. We'd like to think we are. But what was key about Microsoft Office was its ability to integrate, the ability to move things around within the construct. People do not buy networks for fun. We wish they did. I'd be retired, I'd be at the beach if they did. They don't. They buy it to put things on it. And fundamentally, the thing they're putting on that is CPU and computing. So what we've done, we focus on connectivity, communications, and computing, either at a very physical level, the likes of Google, the likes of Amazon, the likes of Microsoft, or at a complete trust level. It depends what your business is. If you're in the business of building these things, we do it down here. If you're in the business of consuming them, i.e. if you're an enterprise, then makes more sense for you to consume it rather than to go and build it and then do the thing you have to do for your customers. What we also then do is we spread this globally. So it's cloud computing, but instead of it being the traditional data center model, we've basically built it out into the network. It means you have low latency. You also have privacy. I'll touch on that in a minute. We then layer on top service management. Interroute has about 2,500, 3,000 enterprise customers globally. That's a very quick bit about Interroute. This will hopefully make more sense as I go on. So what is happening? Now, normally at this point, I would talk about decline in physical shipments and talk about the increase in infrastructure as a service, fastest growing as a service segment, 42% year on year. Service shipments are flat/declining. People are not using more computing, they're just using more workloads. They're getting more efficient in how they consume it. We saw that with networks, we saw that with communications, we're seeing it with connectivity, with computing. What's more interesting is less about that side of it and more about what's actually happening from an enterprise perspective to your users. Well, firstly, you used to have a world whereby you knew where they were, and that defined them. That desk, that phone, that network interface card, forget who the person was. That office defined your interface to your users. Then what happened is they all legged it, right? So everyone decides, hey, I'm mobile now, right? I've got my smartphone, I've got my tablet, I've got my laptop, I've got Wi-Fi, I've got access, I've got to be out and about, I'm everywhere. So the model by which you defined your security, your governance, and a lot of the way you rolled things out suddenly became less well-defined, so to speak. And so what you're talking about, and the analysts, and I don't know if you have any in the room, give it obviously names, rather than just saying people have legged it, they will call it people have gone mobile, social, informed, i.e. they want access to information. And effectively, your business, your IT business is an island, right? It's in a data center. It's in your comms room. It's somewhere, right? And fundamentally, you've got to get to it. People have got to get to it all the time. And what happens in the old world of fixed, where people were fixed, you knew how to get to them. You had predictability. We remember this 5, maybe 10 years ago. You'd look at a corporate network, hugely predictable flows. You know, the 9 o'clock whoosh as people logged on, sort of came down, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, the challenges are more access related. So what's happening is you've got a very mobile edge, and you've got a very static, almost like, if we like, use that analogy, we've got an island. And so one of the challenges here is you're always playing catch up. One of the common themes I hear from folks who are building out services, there's always a tension in terms of how people can catch up, and the growth in shadow IT, if you want to give it that name, the growth in things like Salesforce.com. Salesforce.com grew not because sales guys, had gone through, they're impatient, right? They'd sit through 3.5 years of Siebel or Oracle or whoever it was, CRM managed by the IT guy, and they'd meet a bloke down the pub who said, have you tried Salesforce? Just log on, they'll give you a free trial. It kind of does what you want. Of course, it belies a load of data issues, but the ease of access was there. So what people did, and what people are doing is they find flexibility. So they, if you like, run to the cloud. But in some respects, you can argue, you get relief, you get simplicity, you get efficiency, you get speed. And I'm very conscious, especially at conferences like this, you kind of get two kinds of speaker. You get the, let me tell you why the cloud's really, really scary, and therefore I've got a solution that's going to fix it, right? Or you get the world should move to the cloud because I can't deal with the security issues you're going to ask me. So what I'm going to try and avoid, hopefully, is avoid falling into one of those camps. And what you'll find is that, practically speaking, the simplicity of access and immediacy of experience is a good thing, right? Anyone who thinks, well, no, that's a bad thing, that's fine. But I would say that's not necessarily a rational thought, right? Most of the things we find in life, we like the fact that we order a pizza with Domino's and 30 minutes later it's here, right? We wouldn't like it if we ordered a pizza from Domino's and 3.5 hours it was here, right? So we like immediacy. We like things to occur quickly. We like simplicity. We're driven by convenience and simplicity. So that's a good thing. The key thing, obviously, we talked about traditional IT being an island. What you're really doing here is as you race to the cloud, you are somewhat creating another island. So your customer's no longer stuck to his chair. He's in his app store, his Play Store, and he's doing his thing. You're sitting there going, well, hang on, we've got an infrastructure migration project, 6 months. It's going to take some time, right? And they're already off doing whatever they're doing. Europe, and this is for any of our American colleagues, as we have to remind them, is we do have an umbrella super state, the EU. I work with the EU Commission on several things, and it's hugely complicated. Europe is actually a bunch. Talk to any accountant about Europe, and they'll go, yeah, whatever, right? I deal with every single region. Tax, whatever. We sell fiber to people for tax reasons because they can't own an asset in that region because they don't want to file a return, right? So Europe is a complicated place. The other thing is, for those who recognize that is obviously from Harry Potter, the infrastructure, if you compare it to the guys building software as a service delivering via their internet, the agility of infrastructure, the agility of delivery in most corporate environments is not the same, right? Because you've created domains, you've created different domains using firewalls and this sort of thing. So the openness of your environment is probably constrained. Your ability to change things is probably constrained. So if we look at it, the cloud gives you that agility, immediacy, and flexibility. And then people have all these issues. They talk about security, easy to get locked in, control, reliability, i.e. the best way to avoid failure is to fail constantly. And people say it's slow. These are not issues with the cloud. These are issues with the implementation you're buying, right? Forget, oh, the cloud is slow, it's bad, it's that. Forget that. The cloud is about abstraction of assets from you and about utilization of assets to you. The security of that cloud is a function of how you access it. If you access it over the open internet, then yes, it's going to be less secure than if you do it via some private layer 2 MPLS VRF. These are just stuff we know, right? So it's implementation as opposed to the thing. So if you think, people like the idea, but there are a bunch of issues you need to take into account. Access. Generally speaking, people nowadays want ubiquitous access to everything, everywhere. Data control is absolute. Accountants, as I mentioned before, have no sense of humor, right? Auditors, less. You would be if you were an auditor, right? It's not it's hardly the most enlivening job. I had a customer who was recalling to me, he used a fairly popular sales automation tool based in America. And his auditor said to him, where's the data? And he goes, in the cloud. And the auditor goes, does it have a street address, right? So he rang up the guy and he said, where is the data? And the sales guy from the company said, in the cloud. And he goes, does it have a street address? And he goes, I don't know. Of course, it does have a street address. It's in a data center, and it happened to be in Utah, I think. But the point being, it does have a street address. It has a place, and that's the thing. 5 minutes. I better go quickly then. So what we're talking about here is redefining it in terms of an implementation. Traditional cloud computing is you go to the cloud. What we're talking about If you think about networks, what happened is people moved stuff into networks. Why did they move it into networks? Because it's more cost efficient. Why does Amazon put its big logistics centers on the M6 and the M1? Because it's more efficient. They don't put it in a small village in Cornwall. So what we've done is we've placed the computing into the network. So you get the privacy with MPLS, so you can build it within your private network, so you get your private cloud, but you get that public cloud experience. We then scatter it around the world globally in data centers with certification, and because it's part of a network, it's inherently hybrid. That's how we build things today. That's how we've always built them. We've got a customer who's got an AS400. You're not going to stick that on a hypervisor, right? That's got to be part of his solution. You have a common view. That common view, rather than necessarily trying to virtualize everything, you just say, well, some of that stuff is always going to be the same, right? It's going to be horrible and physical. The lowest common denominator at an integration level, at a hybrid level, is a network, right? It's cheap, it's efficient, and we know how they work, right? There's no necessarily, we're not trying to redefine the future here. So what we've done is we've created this platform, which is kind of a pool of resources. We don't charge you for network. So you can build as many of these as you like across our network. You can build highly resilient ones. Why do we want to do that? Why don't we charge for network? Because if you build a highly resilient platform on us and it's highly resilient, your likelihood of failure is less. Therefore, the operational overhead for us is less. So it's a good thing. So it's, we could say it's a generous offer to people. It's also a very practical thing for us to do. It's what we do with networks. We make them resilient, therefore they don't break, therefore people don't call you up and get disappointed. So it's all about creation of this sort of thing. We also don't contend at any level, so it's going to be very fast. Generally speaking, in tests, 3 times faster than sort of traditional data center interconnects. Why? It's going straight into an MPLS core as opposed to a data center aggregation switch. It's just a more efficient network. In terms of price, we like to think we're faster and cheaper than 2 well-known brands you may have heard of. And so you can build it online, you can try it. We also didn't stop at computing. We've done it with communications, we've also done it with networking. So the idea is we're automating. This is what Unified ICT is about. It's about automating. Once you get it into a virtualized environment, once you get it into a common platform, you can automate. So we've created this automation layer. And then we layer on top management. And then you can run scripting tools in terms of building out services for your customers. Oh, just on this list, we answer access is ubiquitous. You're a service provider effectively. Data control, you place the data where you want it. Performance availability, we'd like to think it's faster. In tests, it is faster. In tests with customers, it is faster. They've told us that. It's inherently hybrid. It is pay-as-you-go, if you want it to be pay-as-you-go, or you can sign up, as some of our customers in Italy have done, for 5 years. They're a public university. They wanted surety. And you get management. We've been doing this for the last 10 or 15 years. The other last thing, right? RFPs. Don't do them, right? And I'm sure you're going, yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you, right? Don't do an RFP. Why? Because an RFP is a guess. You're going to write something, give it to a supplier. He's going to write something back. You're going to read it, right? And you're going to go, I bet he's lying. Let me ask 15,000 more questions. He's going to answer all your questions. And you're going, oh, he's good, right? And then you get the lawyers in, and they ask the really stupid questions, right? And you're banging your head on the table. That's an RFP. This model is don't trust us. Don't trust anyone. Go out with a proof of concept. Say, oh, okay, I hear your hype, your network, and all that's great. Build it. Tell you what, you build it for me and show me. Show me is a much simpler way of doing things. And they go, all right, okay. Well, maybe I'll change this. And then they may want to do an RFP. Point being, do it with experience, right? The whole paper-based negotiation is deeply depressing and frustrating, I think, for all of us. I speak as someone with little or no patience. Thank you very much. If you want to try it, that's where you go. Thank you.